A man with no past. The first thing he noticed was the pain, a dull, pounding ache in his head. He groaned, trying to open his eyes, but the lights above were too bright, forcing him to squint. His body felt heavy, his throat dry, and the steady beeping of a heart monitor filled the quiet room. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse rasp. A figure moved beside him, and a soft voice followed. "Hey, easy there, you're in the hospital," the voice said. It was a nurse, her face swimming into focus. "You've been through a lot." He blinked, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Hospital?" His mind was foggy, like trying to grasp at smoke. He shifted, and the pain in his head flared. Instinctively, he raised a hand to touch the bandages wrapped tightly around his skull. "Do you remember what happened?" the nurse asked, her voice kind but cautious. He tried to think back, but his mind was blank. Nothing came. No memories, no images, not even a hint of who he was. Panic bubbled in his chest. I don't know," he whispered, the words trembling on his lips. "I can't remember anything." The nurse's expression softened. "It's okay. You've been through a trauma. The doctors will help." Before he could ask any more, she disappeared, returning moments later with a doctor, tall man in his late 40s with glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He introduced himself, but the man barely registered the name. His mind was too overwhelmed. "How are you feeling?" the doctor asked, flipping through a chart. "Like I got hit by a truck," he muttered. "What happened to me?" "You were found unconscious in an alley downtown, severely beaten," the doctor said. "You've been in and out of consciousness for days. We're treating your injuries, but it seems you've experienced some form of memory loss, possibly due to the trauma or a concussion. Do you remember anything? Your name, where you live?" His heart pounded as he searched his mind, desperate for any detail, any shred of identity. But there was nothing, just an overwhelming emptiness. "No, nothing," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't even know my name." Days passed, and despite the doctor's assurances, the man's memories didn't return. The hospital had no identification for him, no wallet, no phone, nothing to tie him to a life outside the sterile walls. They called him John Doe, a placeholder for a man with no past. As he recovered physically, he tried to make sense of his situation. Nurses came and went, doctors ran tests, but nothing changed. The emptiness remained. One afternoon, as he stared out the window, the door to his room creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, lips trembling. She looked as though she'd seen a ghost. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. He turned to her, confused. I don't know you," he said cautiously. The woman stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. "David, it's me. It's Sarah, your wife." His heart raced. "Wife?" He searched her face, but nothing clicked. No memory stirred. "I don't remember," he started, but she cut him off, rushing to his bedside and grabbing his hands. "It's okay," she said quickly. "I was so worried. They said you were missing for weeks, and when they found you..." She trailed off, her voice breaking. "It doesn't matter now. You're alive. That's all that matters." She sat with him for hours, telling him stories about their life together, their house, the small town they lived in, their plans for the future. But none of it felt real to him. Each story was like hearing someone else's life, a stranger's memories. Weeks went by, and David was discharged from the hospital to go home with Sarah. Their house was small but cozy, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. Yet, even as he settled into this life that was supposed to be his, something felt off. His days were filled with an odd sense of disconnection. Sarah was loving and patient, always hopeful that his memory would return, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He tried to force himself to remember, looking through old photo albums, revisiting places they'd been together, but it was as though someone else had lived that life. One night, as he lay awake next to Sarah, he heard a soft ping. His phone, something Sarah had bought to replace the one he'd lost, had received a message. "Don't trust her. She's lying." He froze, staring at the screen. His heart raced as he read the message over and over. "Who sent this?" His fingers trembled as he typed back. "Who is this?" There was no reply. He stared at the phone for hours, waiting for something, anything, but the message never came. Over the next few days, David tried to ignore the text, but it gnawed at him. He started noticing little things. Sarah would avoid certain questions. Whenever he asked about the day he went missing, she would change the subject or act upset. There were no police reports about his disappearance, no newspaper articles, no record of the life he supposedly lived before waking up in that hospital. One afternoon, David drove to the city, retracing his steps from the night he was found. The alley was as nondescript as any, with no signs of the attack that had left him unconscious. But as he stood there, a man approached him from the shadows. "You need to get out of here," the man hissed, glancing around nervously. They're watching. David's pulse quickened. Who's watching? Who are you? The man shoved a crumpled envelope into his hand. Don't trust her. You're not who you think you are. You were involved in something bad. Real bad. Before David could ask anything else, the man disappeared into the crowd, leaving him alone with the envelope. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing a single photograph inside of him, but with people he didn't recognize. People who looked dangerous. On the back of the photo, a note was scrawled in messy handwriting. Asterisk asterisk, they're coming. Remember before it's too late. Asterisk asterisk. That night, David confronted Sarah. He showed her the photograph, demanding answers. Her face went pale. David, I can explain. Stop calling me that. He shouted. I'm not David, am I? She started crying, but this time it felt different. It felt like guilt. You weren't supposed to remember, she whispered through her sobs. It was supposed to stay buried. They promised. Who? David demanded, but before she could answer, the lights in the house flickered. Outside, the sound of tires screeched to a stop, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps approaching the door. Sarah's face twisted with fear. You have to go, she said, pushing him toward the back door. Run, they're coming for you. David hesitated, but there was no time. Whoever they were, they had found him. Without looking back, he ran into the night, the photograph clutched tightly in his hand. As he fled into the darkness, only one thought pounded in his mind. Who am I really? The end was far from over, and David knew that the truth, whatever it was, would either set him free or destroy him completely.